Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, Eric, what's up, man?
Sorry, it was a permission thing on my phone I had to correct. Yeah, cool. Hey, happy birthday, Ryan.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing this on your birthday.
You say that like I have an option, my dude. Work comes first.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like takeover of operations when you're closing on a park, specifically like how to transfer, rent collections and that kind of thing. Like, if I'm closing on the 2nd of June, for instance, let's call it that. What are you doing in advance of that to like let people know where the rent is going to go? How are you collecting rent early on? Are you switching to ACH right away before you close? Like, how does that work?
Hey, Eric, you still there? It got loud and then you dropped off.
Oh, sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Hey there.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just wondering if you could talk a little bit about taking over operations and collections on a park you're closing on.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, look, the reality is, first and foremost, you need to get rent, the money revenue hose directly pointed at you. You need to make sure that the former owner doesn't accidentally get rent, because good luck trying to get that back. Some people are nice. Some people are just like, well, he owed me that from blah, and it's not my problem anymore. Like, people are literally thieves. And we were literally talking about that on the group call today. People are literally thieves. That's, priority number one. And I got a story for that in a minute. But I'm going to just go through just kind of a checklist that is available to group mentees and one-on-one mentees on first 30-day checklist, AKA operational takeover. And obviously you start some of this prior to closing. But, first and foremost, you need to make sure you have a bank account set up. You need to make sure you have checks, credit cards, or if you don't, you need to make sure you have a way to pay all the bills, switch over things like AT&T or Spectrum or utility company, right? You need all of that switched over into your name ASAP. Owners are not really thrilled when you don't do that. And a lot of them, by the way, will literally just preemptively call and cancel. And the last thing you need on your first day is, or one of your first days is the water going out. That's a big deal. So you got to make sure you have a way to pay everything, or at least track it and then reimburse yourself after the fact with a journal entry or Excel file or whatever. Got to make sure your, rent rolls correct, your delinquency is correct. Last thing in the world you want is to go knock on someone's door and be like, you owe me $1,000. And they're like, no, I don't. Here's the receipts, right? Oh, crap. We got to go figure this out. Turns out the guy lied to me. Who's lying, the outgoing seller or the resident? Well, he who has the receipts wins. But a lot of times, and this happened to me a year ago with my Cape Fear mobile home park that I just talked about on Multifamily Investor Nation's podcast, is they literally had ghost residents. I mean, they literally just put a name in on the rent roll and there's no one living in the home. Like that stuff happens, or at least the person moved out prior to closing. Phone numbers, y'all, I cannot stress this enough. I even yell at my own employees for this. Like, if somebody texts in, calls in, emails in, that is a resident, you save the freaking phone number. Y'all, you need strong contact information for things like mass texting, for things like Kyle. Remember earlier today, I was showing you on the group call, the delinquency automations, text, cash pay numbers, stuff like that. Like, all of that is predicated on the fact that you have good, strong contact information. A lot of mom and pops don't keep any, or they just like save it in their cell phone. Beyond that, titles, a lot of times titles trickle in after closing because you don't, because title work is a mess. Got to make sure you're on top of that. Make sure you have a grasshopper or, whatever the other, various phone number, is it telephone ring central or something like that. Make sure you have a way for tenants to contact you. Do not give anybody your personal cell phone number. Like, you got to find a way to keep business and personal separate. You just do. Trust me on this. Otherwise, you know, you have to have a way to compartmentalize, or at least walk away when you have a bad day. And some of my property managers over the years have handed out their own personal numbers because they think it's the right thing to do. And then they get a call at 2 a.m. that a dog is barking. And they're like, dude, leave me alone, right? Like, I left this on because my mom's sick. I thought you were at the hospital telling me my mom's on their deathbed, and instead you are trying to rat out your neighbor. Like, y'all, I'm telling you, keep a separate phone line. I know it can be expensive, but like, trust me, it's worth it. Trash service. Oh my gosh, y'all, trash service. If you're gonna sign up with trash service, do not let these trash companies let you sign up for a 5-year contract. This is by design. They will sue you. They're bigger than you. They will always win. It is freaking robbery. Make sure you quote out trash service. Don't let them tell you you just inherited a contract, depending on the state and what the outgoing person signed up for. No, you didn't. And oftentimes, just by asking them to produce a contract to prove it, they automatically are like, all right, we'll come get our stuff and see you later, right? Quote it out. Let them know you're quoting it out. You know, give me your highest and best. And then they're like, great, we'll give you an even better deal if you sign up for 5 years. No, I will sign up for a year, and that's it. Trust me. I had one at my Eastgate mobile home park that, you know, is like our 4th mobile home park. We had no idea about trash contracts because none of our other properties had it. And we signed up for a 5-year thing. So we like literally just canceled a couple of years ago. It's wild. That's a real thing. Other just random stuff. Eric, great question. Stuff like key copies, changing the locks. Oh my gosh, changing locks. Dude, we've literally had former owners show back up at the property because things like locks were the same and weren't repaired. Dude, stuff like that happens. It's wild. Then you're just going to want to do an audit of everything. You're going to want to audit your park-owned homes, your offices, your sheds, your equipment, your materials, just everything. Make a list. Stay organized. Pay attention to tenants. And I don't just mean tenants that aren't paying you. Like, you know, we talk about this in the group mentorship. Like, you really, like, you want to boot out people who have massive balances ASAP. But then kind of the next tranche of people you want to boot out are people who try to play you. You know, like, they're going to do that. They're, you know, a lot of, you know, it's like my children, like, they're going to push boundaries because they're kids. You know, some of these folks are going to push boundaries because that's just who they are. And like, do you want them as residents? Like, people who are going to be buttheads on purpose to try and see what they can get away with? No. Get them out. You know, it's not a good fit, right? Like, just get them gone. And then pay attention, because sometimes it just takes a little bit for someone to show you their true colors. Kind of like dating. When you go on a first date with someone, generally speaking, you don't tell them that you're obsessed with Pokemon. Right? Like, you kind of wait a little bit to soft launch that later, right? When the relationship's kind of on more, you know, stable grounding, before you let them know that, you know, Charizard's your favorite Pokemon. May not land well, right? At least get a couple dates in before you start evolving your Pokemon on your app. Anyways, same thing with residents. Sometimes, you know, they seem great, they follow the rules, they pay the rent, and then just, you know, casually a few months later, they drop the N-word in front of you. You're like, all right, well, we probably can't have a racist here. Also, just because I'm white doesn't mean I share your thoughts. Anyways, other things to consider, Eric. Leases. A lot of mom and pops love verbal leases. It's good to get people on new leases. It offers them more protection. A lot of folks are like, I'm not going to sign that. You're just going to raise my rent. Dude, I'm going to raise your rent anyways. Like, no, this lease is for your protection and mine. So you have something that says, hey, my landlord's going to provide me X, Y, and Z service in exchange for this, right? And also, if you get in a fight with an ex, or, you know, some stalker or something crazy, and you're like, dude, like, or like, I let my cousin move in, right? Like, if the police show up and they go, well, who lives here? And your cousin goes, me, not him. And you say the same thing, they may kick you both out. But if you have a lease, you can say, see, and then I can show up as your landlord and back you up. Another big important thing is dealer's licenses. If you're going to sell homes, certain states, I believe most states, require a dealer's license. Make sure you do that Other things that, depend, stuff like home renovations if you have vacant park-owned homes, submeters if you're going to build back, maintenance folks, you're going to want to see if you want to keep who you got or boot who you got, mailboxes if applicable, potholes, possibly finding a new manager, finding contractors, auditing trees. Oh my gosh, audit trees. You got to audit trees. I'm just, before we hopped on this call, did a report for some of my stuff in South Carolina, and I went through, and I mean, we spent over 20 grand in trees alone last year, which is wild. The trees are, a constant issue. And then another big thing too, y'all, get out of your car and walk the property, especially if you know where the water lines are. If you know where those water lines are, you can walk them and find leaks. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've walked a property just around the give or take where I think that the water lines are, and I just found some mushy areas, and turns out it's a water leak. Another thing too is like if there's a weird amount of growth in an area, might be because there's a lot of water. If you got a water leak in your property, walk your property. One of my most recent acquisitions here in Charlotte, we bought it in August. Day one, I was out there walking myself, talking to residents, introducing myself, introducing everybody on the team. And sure enough, we got a text message from someone saying, hey, you mentioned a water leak. Have you checked over here? And while I was there, I walked over there and I was like, boy, that's a lot of water and it's clear. In other words, like, I don't think this is a natural spring. I don't think this is water runoff because it's not brown, doesn't have stuff in it. It's clear as day. Wouldn't you know? Eventually, we found upstream where that leak was coming from. We fixed it, and knock on wood, we haven't had an issue since. So that's a whole lot of stuff I threw at you there, Eric. Was there anything specific beyond that?
Yeah, two things. First, can you just walk through the mechanics of actually changing collections over, say for a closing on the 2nd of the month, where you're going to close and collect for that month? And also, well, maybe you can answer that, and then I'll have one more follow-up.
Yeah, so let me answer this by prefacing with, look, state laws are state laws. You always got to start there. It may be that your state requires you to follow whatever on the lease, and if the lease says you're allowed to pay cash, you have to wait till you can cancel that lease or update that lease to change the method in which you collect rents. Also, certain states I've heard require payment options to be a certain way, like you have to allow people to mail you rent, you have to do X, Y, and Z. So always, always, always consult with your local attorney. Do not cheap out on an attorney. Make sure you're doing things the right way. But let's assume you're in one of my states. I pretty much said just day one, and in all my states, I can pretty much day one say the way you were paying is not the way you're going to pay me anymore. And if you don't pay this way, I will evict you. It's that simple. What I have found is we have next to no issues. I can probably count on one hand the number of exceptions we have made in thousands and thousands of lots for like someone who's older, who doesn't have a bank account, who can't get checks, who can't drive to the store, but we've figured out a way to help this individual. Like, obviously I'm not going to evict someone like that, but someone who clearly can figure it out. By the way, it's better. You get, when you pay online, there's a record of it. When you pay at Walmart with cash pay, you get a receipt. So like, this is just, generally speaking, 80-90% of people just click on without issue. There's always going to be someone who's going to give you some crap up front. And Eric, your first month's always going to be tough because unless you can close kind of mid to late month, as you're closing on the 2nd of the month, you're right in the middle of rent week. What I have seen is, traditionally speaking, most people pay on the 1st or the 5th if you have a 5-day grace period. Typically, the majority of rent comes in on the 5th, at least in what I've experienced. And I'll finish with a story, but before I did, you said there's a second question.
Yeah, fortunately, I happen to be friendly with the seller, so hopefully if there's any overlap, I can get it from him. But The other question is, there's one tenant that fell behind, and there's, maybe about 3,000, probably not that much, maybe like 2,000 in bad debt, but she's now current without having paid that. Let's call it current. She's been paying her rent on the first again. She got like a new assistance program, but that bad debt is still kind of out there. And so how do you treat that when you're closing on a property? You assume responsibility for that bad debt and can collect on it, right?
I would check with your local state, all the states that I am in. When you acquire a business, you acquire accounts receivable. So therefore, if they're carrying, $2,000 worth of accounts receivable, AKA bad debt, I guess it's technically not bad debt until you write it off. So technically it's accounts receivable. You absolutely inherit that, and you absolutely can and should try to collect that. What I will say is, generally speaking, with a very limited number of exceptions, when you meet someone who has significant bad debt, this is not a once in a lifetime thing. This is not never. I've had plenty of people legitimately fall on tough times, and I've been able to help them stay put. The overwhelming majority of individuals with balance day one, this ain't nothing unique. This is who they are. They just don't like paying rent for one reason or another, or they don't, they want to live in a way that they just can't afford. Like, I'm not saying bad luck doesn't happen. It does. I'm willing to work with people. I've said that I'm always willing to write someone a check to make the situation a little bit better and get them to a better situation. There are just folks who, refuse to move in with family, refuse to get a roommate, refuse to get something more affordable, refuse to stop buying Dale Earnhardt Jr. hats when rent is due. Like, I hate to say it, but like, there are just some people who are just awful with money. And they deliberately try to get free rent. I mean, they'll go and brag to people about getting free rent. Like, I've seen that in about every market. We'll get wind that such and such is on, at the local Quick Trip gas station, bragging to everybody about how he found a way to not pay rent. Like, those people do exist. And, basically you hit them up with this, like, look, you owe $2,000. You can pay me $1,500 today or $1,000 today, and I'll just write off the rest, and we can start clean. This is your one and only exception. I've done that and gotten chunks of rent before, wrote off the rest. I've also gotten zero before, and I've also had people end up paying all of it and staying and being great, but I would say the best thing to do is try to collect a ton now, because a lot of times it's just like someone who's just like, well, I don't want to pay the last guy, but I'll pay you. Okay, great. We got to pay it all now. We don't have all of it now. Okay. How much do you have? 1,500. Great. I'll take it. I'll write off the extra 500. Or like, nope, you're trouble. You're a sex offender. You're this, that, or the other thing. I'm just going to use this as the excuse to evict you. Or, I can write you a check and you can give me the keys and that be that. Right. So there's a lot of different ways that you can handle this. But Eric, I'll say this, man, generally speaking, if the resident has a balanced day one, it's best just to part ways. Don't even be like, hey, I got 1,000 today. Great news, sir, ma'am. You have $1,000 to get a U-Haul and a security deposit from somewhere else. It looks like you have a security deposit here. I will give you that in full. In fact, I'll go to your new landlord and write the check to them. Like, not gonna be difficult. I'm happy to be generous here. Just get them gone, try to be kind. Money lubricates exits. Get them gone. Don't ever worry about it again. Because generally speaking, it's the 80-20 rule, Eric. 80% of your problems come from 20% of your residents. So if you can get these people out fast and just focus on the good ones, everybody wins.
Have you seen an eviction happen? Like, if she's paid the last 3 months on time, but had a bad, a balance from before, can you really evict on that? Or is the judge going to be like, well, you just took over and she's been paying you on time. I'm not going to order an eviction based on a previous balance that transferred from a prior owner. Like, what's my leverage to really collect on that?
State dependent, judge dependent sometimes, county dependent sometimes. So I just want to preface that, the states that I do business in may or may not apply to what you're facing. Generally speaking, what I have seen, as long as there is a paper trail to it, there's not really much that, you know, these folks can do. You know, they signed a piece of paper or, you know, entered a verbal contract saying that they were going to pay, and then they didn't, and then they can't produce a good legal counter argument as to why they should not have had to pay that. There's a lot of judges out there who are very pro tenant. It is really hard. I mean, so I got a couple stories I could tell about this. Eric, I actually had to go and testify in court under oath for something I did not do, I was not around for, against a very notoriously pro tenant attorney. Long story short, I ended up getting written into the general partnership of a property where we had an ejectment of the operator. The guy was so bad, he ended up basically disgracefully getting pushed out. And these friends of mine who had bought this mobile home park, this has been years ago, by the way, reached out to me and they're like, "Can you fix this?" And I was like, I mean, like, if you're asking me to put money in, no. If you're asking me if I'm going to be expensive, yes. If you're asking me if this is a guarantee, no. But if you're asking me if this is possible, I will say yes and get your checkbook out. And they agreed, and they gave me a nice package, and I went in and I fixed it, which is great. We actually just refinanced that one, which is great. So all the investors got their money back, and it had a happy ending. But one resident, who is one of these people who went to the QT and started bragging, you know, like, what are you gonna do? You know, like, these folks are legitimately trying to not pay rent, and they're trying to put all sorts of ridiculous, you know, reasons out into the ethos so they can get free rent. And the judge was just in love with it. I mean, this judge absolutely loved their story, which I can share it with everybody another time. This judge loved this story. For whatever reason, loved these people, hated us before. I mean, she was like, "I know this company, this is bad." And you know, like, as much as you want to be like, I've been here for a week. I didn't do any of these things. Like, all this to say, Eric, these folks had a back due balance. And guess what? They had signed a piece of paper that said, you know, whatever it was, $895. And I had a little printout that showed that they were paying $895. And they just decided to not pay that anymore, plus their back balance. Plus at least the outgoing company. Actually, no, it wasn't the company that got ejected. It was the company before that got a copy of this person's driver's license. And so we basically were like, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, is that your driver's license? Under oath? Yes. Is that your signature? Yes. Does that say $895? Yes. And the judge was like, I hate everything about this. And I'm sitting here like, dude, isn't this a conflict of interest? You're as a judge, you're being biased. She's like, I hate to say this, but like, your driver's license, your signature, your behavior or pattern of paying, like, I can't, like, it doesn't matter what my personal opinion is here. I have to rule in favor of the landlord. So we won that case. It was a huge case. And wouldn't you know, this delightful couple, as soon as they heard the judge say, we will now be ruling in favor of the landlord, literally charged the bench and tried to attack the judge, and then got escorted out by the sheriff, and then waited in the parking lot for everybody to walk outside, and then attacked again. So there you go. So that's a very long-winded way of saying yes, Eric. You can, you should, and sometimes, you know, people just have to wait to show you their true colors. And by the way, now that that individual has been out, that property's been a lot quieter, residents a lot happier. Anyways, I have a follow-up story to that, Eric, unless you had another follow-up question.
No, that's it for me. Thanks.
Just quickly before we take on our next question, I just want to briefly share with you that was the same property, by the way, where the gentleman got ejected from the general partnership. I remember showing up to that property. It's been what, 4 years ago, however many years ago. I showed up to that property, and I must have found 5 different ways that this individual, this operator, was being literally stolen from fake home sales to a property manager knocking on doors collecting rent to a salesperson literally selling drugs, which is wild, to a property manager collecting rent with a gun, which was like unreal. There were stacks of papers that were completely disorganized, including code enforcement notices. It was a mess. And I mean, imagine walking into, imagine buying something off market, and walking into a mess like that. Not that I bought this off market. I was written into the equity. Imagine walking into a situation like that. The question is, what would you do if you walk in and you're like, about everything that's wrong, that could be wrong, is wrong. The news is here. There's a gubernatorial candidate here trying to make landlords look evil and would love to make your company, be the poster child for that. You have ambulance chasing attorneys here because the playground fell apart. You have, people saying our rent's too high and we're going to band together and basically get free rent. To maintenance issues, to people selling drugs everywhere. Like, I mean, you name it. About every single issue, with exception of maybe the Department of Health, because it was direct billed utilities, about every single issue that was there that you can imagine was there. It was all there. I mean, it had it all. And the reason why I bring all this to everybody's attention here in terms of turning over ownership of property, why is this relevant? I'll tell you why this is relevant. In the literal worst case scenario, property is going bankrupt. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong. What do you think my first decree was to the people who were working there, who, by the way, all have since been fired? This is rather than ask this question, I'll just tell you the answer because I know other folks have questions. In that moment, I said, everybody stop everything you are doing. Like, no one is to do anything else. Like, you now all report to me. Everybody stop what they're doing. I want a cash pay and e-pay card for every single person in this community printed out and on their front door. And then I want every single person texted, called, emailed, whatever, their payment information. Period. Full stop. It was the 29th of the month, like coming up on rent week. We can solve problems if revenue is coming through. If there's money, we can throw money at it. If there's no money, we're dead. So I literally said, everybody stop what you're doing. Make sure the money funnel is pointed directly at us. And I'll never forget that, because that turned out to be the right thing to do, because people kept trying to collect money that didn't work there or own anything or had no business being there. And as soon as we did that, people spilled out with these crazy stories about people stealing money or, knocking on doors with guns, trying to collect money. And it was a nightmare. And people immediately thanked us. Like, I knew something in my heart was wrong. I knew I was paying the wrong person. Speaking, Eric, of back due balances, it was a ton of people with back due balances who had paid. And they were like, we knew it was weird that the dude wanted to collect cash and wouldn't give us a receipt. And I'm like, dude, generally speaking, I would attack y'all for stuff like this. But like, this is the one time where I actually believe you that you probably did pay rent. So anyways, that was a wild story. That was an extreme story to basically say, look, when you're taking over a property, the number one most important thing you can do by a mile is make sure the rent is going to your bank account and not somebody else's pocket. You make sure you have accurate balances. If there are bad people, you need to figure out how to get them out and keep everybody safe. And in terms of back due balances, attack it. That being said, Sometimes you got to get the whole picture because it turns out there could be people stealing. Anyways, fantastic set of questions, Eric. Michael, what do we have next?
I don't know if anyone on the call has a question, but Tiernan asked, how are future dispo cap rates determined? Would current comps be irrelevant because they will be different several years down the line?
Yeah, that's a great question. We attacked this in depth on the group call, on one of the recent group mentorship calls. Look, you call it a disposition cap rate, call it an exit cap, call it whatever you want. There's a bunch of different ways of categorizing it. But in so many words, for those who don't know what this means, this is basically saying, how am I going to reasonably underwrite whatever the sale price is one day when I sell it, right? So your underwriting says you buy it for $1, it gives you NOI of 10 cents, and it's going to be worth $2 in X number of years. In other words, I bought it at a 10 cap and I sold it at a 5 cap. Is that fair? That's a really tough thing to underwrite towards, especially if you're acquiring for capital appreciation like I am. I don't acquire for cash flow anymore. I look to basically increase the value of mobile home parks so that the highest and best use continues to be a mobile home park. And in that way, I can fight off the developers and then keep the bulldozers out. And that way I can raise rents slower over time rather than ripping the Band-Aid off overnight. And so that's how I've decided I'm going to kind of try to my best to solve the affordable housing crisis is, make it fair rent, but get there slowly. In other words, when I underwrite, it is unbelievably dependent on the exit cap rate. It is unbelievably stacked. The IRR is unbelievably stacked, like to the tune of 70, 80+% of the IRR is derived from the reversion or eventual sale refinance price of the mobile home park. And therefore, the cash flow becomes nearly irrelevant. In that situation, I better be right. Better be right. And so what do I personally do? I generally speaking underwrite towards to whatever a fair cap rate is today, or I increase it slightly. If I'm buying something for, say, a 6 cap, I might underwrite it at a 7. A lot of times I buy stuff that are, sub 4 cap, sub 3 cap, sometimes negative caps, right? And so in that situation, I'll look at the market and say, this market's plus or minus a 5 or 6 cap. Maybe we'll add a point to it just to be conservative, just to make sure my operations are tight. So in other words, I'm not buying this hoping, we got to remember, y'all, this isn't the stock market. You're not buying it. It's totally out of your control and you hope it's going to go up, right? We're buying this and we're going there and we're swinging a hammer, so to speak, ourselves. And we have a lot we can control to make these assets better. And therefore, there's a lot within our control, unlike the stock market. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to value it like it's the stock market, right? You're not trying to time it perfectly at the bottom, right? It's not a single family home, same story. You're not like, ooh, is it a good time to sell? Is it a good time to buy? No, like if the math pencils out, you do it, good times or bad, if it checks your boxes, so to speak. So this is a huge portion of that. Obviously, this is a little bit more of an underwriting question, but happy to address it. Generally speaking, this is more what your preferences are and your strategy is and kind of your underwriting style. Again, I'm more conservative. I more want to make sure that I can come in operationally and make the asset better. So therefore, I'm not going to, buy it for a 10 cap, sell it for a 5 cap, and then, high five myself and be like, wow, the IRR is great. I'm doing the deal, right? It's more like, I'm going to buy it for a 5, underwrite it for a 6 or maybe 6.5, 7. And if I can, go in there and make the place better because my team and I were there, then I'm going to do it. So in terms of like, how do some other folks do it? Look, I mean, I think the reality is predicting the market is incredibly difficult. Look, I'm not, I'm no macro economist. You know, I have a master's in business, which is wonderfully irrelevant. I learned a bunch of outdated stuff. Basically, I showed up, I passed the test, and I left. I paid a bunch of money. You know, it's like that doesn't necessarily make me overly qualified, but it does make me qualified to say this. Ain't nobody know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and neither does anybody on this call. Nobody has a magic ball, a crystal ball, or whatever it's called. We all have to kind of make the best decision at hand with the information we have today. And yeah, look, I mean, would it be nice if we could buy stuff for a 6 cap today and it's trades at a 3 cap tomorrow? Yes. Like, is it a disaster if you buy for a 6 cap today and it trades for a 9 cap tomorrow? No, if you hold it. So it turns out if it's a rainy day, don't sell, right? Like, real estate is cyclical. You can wait as long as your investors are cool with it. You can refinance it. You've done your job. It's really hard to want to buy during a rainy day, and it's really hard to want to sell during a sunny day. But the right answer is, hey, if it's a sunny day, you got to be proud of what you have and grateful, and then dispossess of things that it's time. And if it's a rainy day, you got to hunker down and continue to go. So I would just strongly urge people not go, hey, you know what? I'm buying for an 8 today. It's going to be, you know, a 5 tomorrow. Oh man, look at, you know, now we can lean into pricing, and you're effectively speculative buyers at that point in time. That's where you get into trouble, is when you're a speculative buyer and you start, you know, again, buying for an 8, hoping to sell for a 5. And then it turns out when it comes time to sell, you can't even sell for a 10. Right. So in other words, I would take this and look more at the operational side. What can I do to make this property better? And then apply, again, your unique strategy. Mine is not cash flow at all. A lot of the group mentees on here and former and current mentees who are tuning in right now know what I'm going to say, which is a lot of y'all's specific strategies are cash flow heavy. So therefore, a cap rate is almost irrelevant. Not completely, though. So yeah, it very much so depends on your specific strategy. Tiernan, I know he's not here, but Michael, tell him I said thank you for the question. I know that was it was a little bit of a finance question and not an ops question, so I hope I could kind of tie in some ops to that.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other questions?
Ryan, I am here, and thank you.
Oh, hey, what's up, man?
I think he's only sort of here. He's actually in Montreal right now. So,
Dude, you're gonna have to learn some French then, man.
Eat some poutine for us, or whatever it's called.
Comment allez-vous?
Very nice. All right. Does anyone have any specific questions right now? Otherwise, we can open the floor to individuals on the live stream. Jason Jones says, "What up, Ryan?"
Jason, man, miss you, buddy. Hope you're doing well. It's just in your state of California and San Diego. It's beautiful. Hope you're doing well, my friend.
All right, Ryan, I got a question for you.
Sure.
So we just had our new parks manager call us, and she was asking that we buy her home for $5,000, and she didn't want a penny less or a penny more. She wanted $5,000 for this home because she had a family emergency, and she said, "quote I need it in like the next 3 hours." So, like, how would you deal with a situation where you have this manager whose feelings you don't want to hurt, and whose a relationship you want to maintain, but obviously you can't go ahead and give her that money, especially without seeing the home?
Yeah, look, anytime someone says, hey, give me $5,000 in the next 3 hours, like, that's obviously skeptical out of the gate. I'm assuming this is a tenant-owned home, yes?
That's right.
I would actually consider giving her the money, and this is a great question, and I'm gonna explain why. So when you have a tenant-owned home, you have a situation where if this person disappears, the abandoned title process is not exactly easy. And even when you have everything necessary to go through it, it ain't exactly quick or inexpensive. So I've done it plenty of times in several different states, Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida, South Carolina. It's never been quick. It's never been cheap. It's never been easy. And oftentimes it's literally impossible. If someone is quite literally willing to hand you over a title for not a lot of money, $5,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money. I'd be inclined to take it because you now have control over that. What I have done in the past is when someone's in a tough spot, I am happy to give them $5,000. They sign the title over to me. I put the title in my name, and I continue to rent them the home for whatever lot rent was. In that way, people can, we literally just did this in the last 2 weeks in Asheville, North Carolina, where an individual who's been a long-time problem tenant, he's had a huge back balance of like $8,000 or something like that. And long story short, it got caught up in the courts because of Hurricane Helene and we were like, look, how much money you got? And he gave us, I think it was like $3,000. So he was like, I'll basically sell you the home for $5,000. I'll continue to live in it. I'll continue to pay lot rent as rent. And then I will pay you back the $5,000 and you will sign the title back over to me. And I 100% jumped at that opportunity. And I will tell you why, because I would love for this situation to work out where this individual ends up paying me back the $5,000 interest-free, don't need to make a profit on this. I would love it if it had a happy ending where it was just, like I mentioned earlier, it was just a hard time. It's a one time where he just, needed, some help. The reality is it doesn't cost me anything, at least in that situation, right? Because he already owed me $5,000. So in other words, he got to just, basically hit the delete button on his back rent, but I got the title. And he can come in the next, say, 6 to 12 months and give me the $5,000 and I'll give him the title back. I'll even pay the couple $100 it is to transfer it one way or another. But Mike, this is what happens. If this dude doesn't pay and acts like a butthead again, it's my home and I'll evict him and he's gone. He won't disappear, right? Like I won't have to go through the abandoned title process because the title's in my name. So like, that's a situation where I would 100% be okay with giving someone money if and only if I get a title and there's no significant back tax or liens on the title, right? Because I've had this happen before where, you agree to something like that with someone and there's a lien on the title and they can't actually sign it over to you. Or like, oh, well, dude, can we do a bill of sale? Like, I don't know where the title is. No. Why? Because I've also heard of this. I haven't had this happen to me, but I've heard of this where someone signs a bill of sale, but then they go and sell the home to someone else and hand the title to someone else. Now all of a sudden you're like, I got a bill of sale and I'm the landlord. And they show up and they're like, I have a title. And you're like, let's sue this guy together. And then the guy's changed his phone number and you don't know where the heck he is. And you're like, well, what do we do? And then this person's like, well, I want money. I'll give you the title. You're like, dude, oh my gosh. And it's a disaster, right? Michael, all of that gets solved when you have the title in your hand. All of that. So if it was me, I would consider it. That being said, you ain't sending that on Venmo. That ain't going today. It ain't going to be quick. Like I can't do that right now. We can't drop everything we were doing, drive out till you get the title, sign it over, verify that you don't have back tax or liens on this thing, right? So like, I think the answer could be yes. Beyond just the obvious, no, this is a ridiculous request. There could be a win there.
Yeah, I like that answer. And our initial response was, it wasn't a no. It was more like, we need more time to kind of think this through. So maybe we'll go back and see what the economics look like. And Tiernan brings up a good point here. In this case, there's no title on homes pre 1995 in New York State. So this bill, I guess a bill of sale would be our only recourse because it's a 1973 home. And then Kieran also responded that this home would probably only sell for a few grand cash. And he is an expert on that, so I trust him there. So maybe we just talk her down. Either way, this was just interesting. This person is also our on-site manager. So we were trying to salvage that relationship. And it's just an interesting situation. I haven't heard of this before, so thanks for the answer. Anybody else have any?
Lillian has to come say hi now because Lily, say hi. You have to now. You say hi to everybody. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good lock on my door, so baby girl just like busts in. She's just like, "Dad, I want to hang out with Dad." Yeah.
Hi, Lillian.
I was just outside playing in the water. See all the people? Say hello. I think she's mad that Bluey isn't on the screen. All right. Say bye-bye, Lily.
Bye, Lily.
Bye-bye, sweetie.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye-bye. That's the other door. Right here. Here, 1 second, everybody.
While Ryan's taking care of that, does anyone have any other questions they want to ask before we close?
Yeah, this is Sai here. I actually have another question, kind of piggybacking off that conversation Ryan was alluding to. Because essentially, Ryan, help me understand. Let me know if you're thinking about this wrong, but you're saying how difficult it can be to evict a tenant-owned home scenario. And I know it can be state specific, but it'd be helpful if you have any advice, because I've gone through this where I've been trying to evict someone who's a tenant-owned home for non-payment, and they're like, all right, you can evict me, but I'm just going to keep showing up because I can't change the locks on their door, right? Because it's not my home versus a park-owned home. Like, I know it can evict them, but in some states I've seen where, okay, if they're not going to move their home, you have to pay to move the home. Sometimes you can resolve that for a cash for keys scenario. I don't know if you have any advice on navigating those situations, especially like in these predominantly tenant-owned home communities.
Yeah, great question. And most of y'all probably already know what I'm going to say. You got a great lawyer. Because the reality is most of us have not passed a state bar exam. We're not overly familiar with the law. And even if we are, don't be cheap here. The reality is different states have very different laws. I'll give you an example. In Florida, you have General Statute 723, in which if you evict a tenant-owned home, you may not touch that home for a certain period of time. However, they may not live in that home, which is interesting. So that directly contradicts what Saeed, I know you're in Georgia, what that individual may have been alluding to in Georgia. So like, hey, yeah, fine, I can't touch your home, but guess what? You can't show up because you not only were evicted and I threw all your stuff out, but you're trespassing. So even if you show up to this property, it's over. And by the way, you also, in some cases, can also disconnect utilities because technically they're not your resident anymore, and you are no longer obliged to provide them water, power, or sewer connections. Again, state dependent, big time. Do not cheap out, get an attorney. That being said, most folks, generally speaking, would rather just take the cash. Look, if they can't pay a couple $100 for lot rent and you're there offering them $5,000 cash, generally speaking, you can work something out. Not always. Sometimes people just want to stick it to the man, so to speak. Sometimes they don't have the title. They never had the title. It's not their home to begin with, and so they kind of know that. But yeah, I would not cheap out on an attorney. Go find a mobile home park specific attorney or someone who's very familiar with it. Know your rights and fight to protect yourself. And even if you know your rights, Saeed, cash for keys, my dude. Always try to cash for keys. Great question.
Okay, helpful. Thanks. All good.
Anybody else have one last question? We have one from Jason Jones that I can ask if not. All right. Jason says, similar situation. Do you prefer to buy a deceased resident's tenant-owned home cheap and rehab it yourself, or let it go to market and sell as a crappy home?
It's a fantastic question. And the reality is it depends on your strategy. So we talk about this in the group mentorship quite a bit. There's a difference between a growth strategy and an income strategy. If you are in a growth strategy, what you're attempting to do is increase the value of the community. you want higher lot rents, you want higher quality homes. In that situation, cash flow is less important. Buy the home, take full control of it, reskirt it, fix the any electrical issues, safety issues inside the home, paint it, side it, vinyl siding, new deck, make the thing look stunning, at least from the outside, and spend the money, recapture that money, make your community look better, charge a higher rent. I know in New York State, there's, I think, Mike, what is it, like a 6% cap on raising rent. An interesting thing that back to your question, Michael, about, like you get that title, this woman has to skip into the night to never be seen again. Not only do you have the title of that home, but you can also bring in someone at a higher rent and not have to worry about, the 6% annual bumps. All of that happens because you've taken possession of that home. If nothing else, Jason, if you buy that home, you have control of that title, at least temporarily. And in literally every state that I've had to do an abandoned title in, it is so much easier when you have a copy of that title. When you have, and so like if you've put that title in your name at one point in time and you're documented and organized, it's a game changer. So to me, if you're a growth strategy buyer, or at least for that particular instance, I would heavily lean on trying to acquire that home. It is tough with deceased individuals. Definitely make sure you have the right attorney in place. You have things like probate to worry about, and will contestations, which I've had to fight through before, where like, someone shows up and goes, well, that, they said that home belonged to me. And then you have to go through probate court, and then they have to prove that it was theirs, and then they can't, and it is delayed, and it's a mess. So I would just say make sure it is clean, get that title and roll on. Or if you are a cash flow buyer, if you're an income strategist, if you will, let it go to market. Do you want to deal with those headaches of rehabbing homes, marketing the homes, selling it outright, missing a month or months of lot rent, or so in other words, there's an opportunity cost of lot rent not collected as well. Do you want to have to fight probate? A lot of I've had this happen before, where someone will pass away, and someone else will show up and be like, I am perfectly willing to fight probate. And then they just start paying lot rent. And then a couple of years go by and you find out they ended up getting the title, and it was a mess, and it was this, that, and the other thing, but you never knew it, and they never paid rent late. So that can happen, and it'd be glorious. And you can not skip a beat in terms of cash flow. So I would say it really depends on, are you chasing after appreciation? So you want to lean into it. Are you in a tougher legislative state where raising rent is tough, and so therefore acquiring an original tenant-owned home is huge because you can now move in someone at a true market rent? Or are you like, dude, I promised my investors, an 8 pref or a 10 pref or whatever pref, and really can't be using CapEx dollars that are meant for mailboxes and trees and roads to, buy a home and rehab it. We need that money to cash flow. I would say it's very dependent on your particular strategy, but great question. That's something that it's interesting because if one person is a capital appreciation buyer and one person is a cash flow buyer, I could give one answer to one of those groups and it'd be fantastic advice and horrible advice to the other group. So it's just important to piggyback off of this point, just to say that a lot of times advice, whether it be legal advice in one state or a strategy in one state, does not apply to another state, or advice for one particular strategy is actually not so great advice for another strategy. So it's just important to remember too that, like, I hate to say it depends. I did get my MBA though, and anyone who also has a master's in business knows that's the famous MBA answer. It depends, but it does heavily depend on specifically here your strategy. Thank you everybody for the questions. Mike, we ready to wind this thing down?
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. If you're tuning into the live stream or on Facebook or on YouTube, there's a link below to join our free school community where you can get updates for all of these webinars, whether it's operations, deal valuation methodology, MHP law, etc. So join up. We have a thriving community of over 250 people now. And we also have a paid mastermind for individuals who actually want to ask Ryan questions directly and myself questions directly at any time. So take a look at those links. We're looking forward to seeing you guys in either community, and see you soon, guys. Thank you so much.